Hello, and welcome to All the Grief, a regular podcast for all those who have been touched by grief. We are your hosts. I am Rebecca Luttrell.
And I am Andrea Mathern. We are two friends, a therapist, and a social scientist, both highly sensitive fellow grievers, here to share our hearts as we talk about all the grief. Good morning, Rebecca.
Good morning, Andrea.
How is your heart this morning?
It's all over the place. In this moment, I feel more settled than I felt earlier this morning, which was, I just woke up really sad and then got mad. So I just felt like I've been riding all these different waves of emotion as I am prone to do. I just let myself feel what I feel and wait for the next feeling to arise. And now, I feel like I got to read the last chapter of a book we're going to talk about today. And that was really helpful, like grounding and settling my heart some. So I'm feeling more settled and grounded in this moment, but it's been a ride.
Yeah, it's been a ride. Well, I'm happy to see you.
Yeah, thank you. How about you? How's your heart?
I feel like my heart has been arriving to today. You know, the weekend I spent at the cabin, and so sad that you couldn't be there with a group of women. And there was so much release and renewal. You know, we're coming into the new moon and into spring. And so there was a lot of letting go and a lot of sort of like thinking about what's ahead. And it was really powerful. And I feel like a lot of really important things were processed in that space together. And like the tenderness of women being together in safety and witnessing each other, and the level of like, oh gosh, it was like comfort and ease and power all at once was just so lovely. The next day, you know, on Monday, had a couple of people just leaving me little voice notes like, oh my gosh, I'm still processing. I'm still, you know, thinking, but it wasn't any like I'm having a vulnerability hangover, any like that. It was just like, oh my goodness, I'm still carrying the magic and medicine of the weekend. And so I was like carrying that through with me through the week. And then, you know, yesterday, a New York Times article broke about Cesar Chavez, who, you know, is a civil rights icon for the Latino community. And like, you know, he was definitely someone my dad looked up to. You know, my dad grew up as a farm worker, and just someone in our house, like you knew his name, you knew Dolores Huerta's name. I remember the first time I met her, I met her at Burning Man.
Wow.
She was like in her 80s, and I met her at Burning Man, and it was just powerful to have met her. For those who don't know, what has surfaced is that not only did he sexually assault and rape Dolores Huerta and other women in the movement, but including at the very least, two young women, like 12 and 13 girls, two girls. And, you know, the part that breaks my heart, so Dolores at 95, 96, she's somewhere around there, you know, told her truth at 96 and felt like she hadn't been able to because she didn't want to take down the movement because it was so much built around him and her. But I think the part that just like was like this stabbing in my heart yesterday was there had always been rumors. There had been whispers of this. And I just fucking am so fucking tired of fucking whispers. And I'm just like conjuring in my soul that like every whisper of it might be, I heard, they feel creepy, it feels creepy, fucking turns into a seismic fucking rumble that cannot be ignored. Because I'm like, that fucking whisper, nobody's fucking good reputation is worth little girls, little boys, little anybody's fucking innocence. And so I just feel this like fucking rage conjuring in my soul where I'm like, I want the magma of the earth. I want it to burn within you that these fucking whispers are someone's innocence. Those fucking whispers are someone's mental health, emotional health, spiritual health. And we just need to stop letting them be a whisper. And it's the same. I felt the same about the fucking Epstein files. And I just remember there was this moment where it was like, who are we willing to let go? And I'm just like, I will let anyone go. Like there is no one reputation dear enough to me to allow more children to suffer, you know? So I come with a little bit of that. I processed a lot of it yesterday.
Yeah.
I mean, it feels like a lifetime of processing. I processed
Yeah.
a lot of the immediate eruption yesterday, but I still, even as I was coming into here, I was like, oh, that's still there. My heart still feels like it wants to
Mm.
tap into the magma of the earth, and I want all the volcanoes to explode at once. That's what I want.
Yeah. Yeah. Keep processing. You know I'm here.
Yeah, I know. And I know you're
Just keep
in.
leaving me messages.
I will. I will. That's part of my process. It
Yeah.
is. So, yeah, my heart feels really tender. And at so many moments, I miss my dad.
Mhm.
And so many moments, I think, like, oh, fuck, what would he think of this? What would he think about a second Trump presidency? What would he think about all of this? And I had this moment this morning. I was brushing my teeth and I was like, I think we would have gotten in a fight about this. I think we
Mm.
would have been on different sides about this.
Interesting.
And it felt really true. And I needed to not create some image of my dad where he would have been like, I will never say Cesar's name ever again.
Mhm.
I needed to not do that. I needed to sit with this reality of this would have been a tension point, I think, between my
Mhm.
dad and I. And not that he wouldn't have believed, but I think the movement would have meant more to him
Mhm.
and these little girls and women. And so I had to sit with that this morning too. I was brushing my teeth and just let that part of my dad be real. And
Mhm.
I'm going to believe that as the lazy ghost that he is, he sees it much more clearly.
Yeah, I think
So
so.
that was a download. I'm sorry. That was a lot.
No apologies. That's real. And thank you for sharing your heart and your vulnerability.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Love you. Well, riding this wave of sheesh, seismic shift and macro and micro, intensities, I am so pleased. My heart feels in alignment to welcome Larry Glover. Larry had a challenging childhood, which gifted him with the experience of turning to nature for solace and learning. The rough years of his youth found him selling his blood for food money, spending his last quarter for a cup of Spokane's black coffee, and digging dinner out of a Safeway dumpster. Larry credits Black Bear, which he met face to face in his tent, with saving his life, at least long enough for him, a couple of years later, to walk into a remote wilderness to die, or to come out a different man. His life was transformed there on a craggy cliff face above the middle fork of the Salmon River through the alchemical encounter with rock and water and fire and breath. In recent years, in an attempt to understand and integrate his early life experiences, it would be a tree, the aspens, among my favorites, which gifted him with a vision of thrivability for humans on planet Earth.
Mm.
Larry's multifaceted career includes time as a family therapist, a social science research consultant, a forest fire fighter and lookout, a wilderness therapist and guide, a river guide, a somatic and energy therapist, and an international organizational learning coach and consultant. Larry is now, in his latest hat, a twice award-winning author of Wild Joy, Eco-Spiritual Encounters with Nature as Teacher, Healer, and Love. We
Mm.
are so excited to welcome Larry Glover to All the Grief.
Yes, welcome.
Thank you, Andrea and Rebecca. It is indeed an honor and pleasure to be here with you and to share and participate in this really vital theme and work that you present and share with the world here. So thank you.
Well, thank you. Thank you for
Yeah.
coming on and sharing with us. So before we move into your book, how is your heart this morning as you arrive?
Well, my heart is good. It feels this paradoxical piece, actually, that's important and so relevant here because it feels like it's carrying both joy and happiness and grief and sorrow. And, which was touched on by each of your intro pieces around your hearts.
Mm-hmm.
And I just feel like we live in this time when we are preparing for the eruption of all the volcanoes on the planet, so to speak, certainly socially, as the social systems as we know them are the ones that have not functioned as becoming clear, and they're in self-destructive mode. And it's an old story that's been going on for a long time, but it's becoming more and more visible and apparent to more people all the time, which brings up this whole theme too of shadow pieces that I think is so relevant for our conversation in times. And I'll leave it with that for the moment. So, yeah.
Well, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. That resonates certainly with us, but yeah, I think more sort of just expansively with the time that we're in. So thank you for reflecting that back. So we have been starting our podcast asking our guests about their grief origin story, that moment when grief sort of demarcated a before and after in your life. And so when you think about that, you think about the transformation of grief and how it transformed you. What is your grief origin story?
Wow, it's such a potent question for me because it touches into the shadow piece so deeply that I believe
Mm.
runs throughout the culture and is mirrored by both Jeffrey Epstein and Deepak Chopra and Cesar Chavez, as you noted just most recently, and powers that be in the highest offices of the land in those structures and also in the religious structures of our land. I was raised into the Abrahamic religions of fundamentalist evangelical preacher father, wherein we were a version of the Church of Christ, wherein we were the only ones going to heaven. The Southern Baptists were considered liberal because they used instruments in the church, and we could find no biblical reference that allowed that. So it was a very literalistic cult interpretation of biblical traditions. The shadow side of that, there are many beautiful people in those traditions, and so what I'm sharing here is my experience and not a prescription for others. And in no way do I mean to condemn or bring judgment on other people here. So this is one of the edges I try to walk as I share my story, because we're all just humans, and I'm just a fellow pilgrim on, wandering on my own path here, trying to find my way as well. However, at 9 years old, I did find myself laying in an alley behind the preacher's house in a little southwestern Colorado ranching railroad town. And it was time to go back to school, and my parents had called me into the kitchen to sit down with them, which was something never happened. And they proceeded to tell me that I would be going to a new grade school, which would be for the second grade, and this would be my third grade school. And I'd started cutting grade school in the first grade. But Mom said, well, nobody will know, Larry, it'll be okay. And I knew it was a small town that was not true. But also I found myself in that alley curled up in a pile of, fall leaves, hating life, hating myself, hating mother and dad, and feeling unloved and hating God, cursing God and cursing Mom and Dad and saying, you had no right to bring me into this world. I didn't ask to be here. And I was in such pain and such grief. I felt so unworthy. And I was afraid of God. I was afraid of hell. It was a hell, fire, and brimstone tradition, which, by the way, I believe is a tradition that still shapes our culture in a very unconscious, shadow kind of way. But I also, at that point, I remembered the rope in the garage, and a friend had recently shared with me how to tie a hangman's knot. And I planned how I could get the ladder and hang the rope from the beam in the garage, and that I would hang myself. And eventually cried myself to sleep. And it was a turning point in my life. I became intimate with, if you will, with death at that time. I later learned that my dad's dad, my grandfather, named Jack, which is my first name, had committed suicide. And later in life, of course, I witnessed and was present to the suicide of a dear aunt on the same side of the family and the cousins. So there's a real depressive, oppressive grief, if you will, that I've been witness to that is real present in that tradition, which I believe is I could go on. But yeah, it's sometimes, I think these stories, extreme stories, help us see, and part of their gift is that they can reveal the underlying shadows, which I think my story does.
Yeah, I so remember reading that scene, you curled up in the leaves, which is like such a tender, sweet image, of just nature holding you and you creating your own nest, but the suffering that you were going through and these thoughts of a 9-year-old, my boys are 8.5. And I think at 9, that those are real musings that could happen. We have a lot of suicide attempts in my dad's family, particularly with the girls. That was never talked about either. And I just remember thinking wait, this happened to other people and no one told me, to at least be careful that you might have this thought too.
Yeah.
And, reading in that story of yours about this generational trauma of death by suicide was really, and just at 9, as a mom, as a human, just wanting to cradle young Larry, and just your relationship with God, your relationship with who was this man, Grandpa Jack, am I that? Am I this? And then over all of that, this sort of I think of Rainn Wilson talks about it as Big Daddy God in the sky, right? The Big Daddy God that's you're bad, you're good. Watching over all of this and that being so real to you as well at 9. It was just a really tender scene. to read. Yeah.
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 Yeah, and I
Thank you.
really appreciated your anger in that.
Hmm.
Like, that felt like that was a spark or a fire that was
Mhm.
like, something's not right here.
Yeah.
And the only way I know to work with that at 9 is just to be like, fuck you, fuck you, fuck you.
Mhm.
Like, and yeah, that it really spoke to something in you that knew there's something wrong here. I'm supposed
Mhm.
to be loved and I'm supposed to feel loved, I think. Yeah.
Yeah, that
Yeah.
moment when you said, like, "I didn't ask to bring in this world. How dare you bring me here and not love me?" I just that,
Yes.
like, whoa, I was just like,
Mm.
I mean,
Mhm.
I felt that for every child that feels unloved, for every
Yeah.
pregnancy that happens that was not chosen,
Yeah.
I remember, like that being something that I actively chose that I never wanted in my
Uh-huh.
life. And when I finally chose that, I remember the flood of like love,
Yeah.
but it was such a choice. It was a very intentional choice. And I just had so many feelings. It was like a flood when I read that part
Yeah.
of just,
Mhm.
how dare you? I couldn't agree more. And
Yeah.
even if
Mm.
they dared, like, where was the rest of the world to love you, to
Mhm.
surround
Yeah.
you in love? And
Mhm.
I just think of that for everyone right now,
Mhm.
but particularly for children should
Yes.
feel loved. And I think when you then get to witness kids who are surrounded in love and the
Mhm.
wildness and weirdness and quirkiness that they are able to
Mhm.
become, you witness it and you just see like the
Yeah.
healing power, the potential that love creates.
Hmm. Yeah.
Mhm.
Well, that really touches for me too. Part of what kept me alive through those times and threatened my life was rage,
Mm,
Mhm.
this wild rage. The grief was wild. And by
Mhm.
that, I mean it was transformative, right?
Mhm.
Became part of my evolutionary journey, as was the rage and is the rage, as I still learn to dance and navigate that territory.
Mhm.
But it brings up for me the shadow side here of that Abrahamic tradition wherein the father is told or hears that he needs to sacrifice and slit the throat of his son
Mhm.
as a sacrifice to this external being who lives out there somewhere. And this man is willing to do that.
yeah.
You
Mhm.
know, this man is willing to slit the son of his throat. And what did he have to cut off inside of himself to do that?
Yeah.
Mhm.
How much did he have to separate and deny and suppress rather than giving his finger to this God in the sky? And
Yeah.
what mother would do that?
Mm.
That's not mother energy.
Yeah.
That is this wounded masculine
Mm,
energy running through our culture where men still sacrifice their families
yeah.
in order to look outside themselves for achievement and worth and value.
Yeah.
Mhm.
We got the tradition, in my experience, creates a separation of the soul and spirit and body.
Mm-hmm.
It fragments us and it requires of men and women, we can go deeply into that too, but, we're all wounded in that from that tradition. And it's a
Mhm.
shadow piece that isn't seen because, in my head, here's this child trying to say, God of love, who will send me to hell if I pay attention and allow my
Mhm.
body to feel what it is innately feeling.
Yeah.
I'm fucked
Yeah.
no
Yeah.
matter what.
No matter
And
Yeah.
so
what.
if I give my life to that God, which I later did for a time in my teenage years and became a little
Mhm.
fundamentalist preacher, it screws in your head around your soul and
Yeah.
spirit.
Yeah.
It, yeah. So, and that's what sustains the capitalistic culture. It
Mhm.
becomes a cannibalistic system wherein we are culturally in this place now in history where we are eating our children and consuming their future, our
Yeah.
future, the future of the planet
Mhm.
as we know it. And so it is an intense time. Volcanoes of the planet, if you will, socially and in the human world and in the ecological systems are in fact imploding and exploding. And how
Mhm.
will I meet that time? How will we meet that time? And that is in many ways the impulse and this message that I try to carry forward in Wild Joy
Mhm. Mhm.
Yeah.
because nature still points the way, because that is who we are. And this remembering of our wholeness is in my system where I find hope.
Mm.
Mm,
Yeah, I feel like all of the quotes and things that I pulled, I was like, well, I have to go back and just keep rereading this because it's a reminder of something that I also feel like I know and like I've carried
mm,
for so many years that I feel like I've said on here before and maybe even recently. I grew up without religion initially because my mom was Catholic and my dad was Episcopalian, and they were like, we can't decide. And they were kids. And so they were like, whose parents are we pleasing? I guess no one's. And so that's what happened. And then when they got divorced, and I lived in the South, and in the South, all the private schools are religious schools.
Yeah.
And so my grandfather agreed to pay for our schooling, but that when we were at a Catholic school, and then the Catholic school was really disturbed that we weren't baptized. But by that time I was in 4th grade. And so reason kind of existed that I wasn't really indoctrinated in that. And it was a real struggle for me to feel that sense of all these people are worried for my soul, but I wasn't. And you introduced this idea of this God who I also know to be unconditionally loving, which feels incredibly confusing. And so I would just pray every night, like, sorry, I don't believe this, but I can feel how I might be wrong. But I'm just like, surely it's complicated to be human. But it was this real struggle in that experience and that feeling of like, and I didn't get confirmed, and people were very concerned about that decision, and it's just like, oh, there's so much shame and there's so much guilt. And I was like, and I don't understand why no one seems to have had the thought, oh, but every other religion believes they have the right God. So like, how would we even know? Like, no one was having that thought. And it was wild to me. But there was something bigger, and then feeling into where we all are in this present reality, as you're naming, like all these systems falling apart, volcanoes imploding, exploding, like, and I'm just like, oh, where's the ground? And for me, it is so remembering something about being alive and a thing that we've been disconnected from, and with nature and all of that. So it was just, that's where that ground in reading your book, I was like, yes, I just can't get enough of hearing people say the messages of like how we find our center at this time that feels so destabilizing. It feels really important. And I would love to sort of move through some of those pieces in here to talk about like the ways that you started to come to this knowing yourself as not inherently bad and wrong.
Yeah. No, thanks for that invitation, Rebecca. Yeah. So for me, it really did begin through nature. And as is told in the book, there's the story of my being on a canoe trip with a young woman friend, freshly separated from the one woman in my life that loved me, that I had married, high school sweetheart kind of thing. And I couldn't sustain that. I didn't love myself enough. And I didn't have any relationship skills. So anyway, I was with this young woman on a canoe trip in Canada and heard noises outside the tent, pots and pans being knocked around. And I had been a Boy Scout and knew enough to hang the food in a tree and camp away from the campfire and the food preparation area, etc. And the short story is, unzip quietly the door of the tent and look out. And as I expected, it was indeed a bear. And so then I'm whispering to my tent mate at that time, it's a bear, it's a bear. And so we're both looking out, and it's my first experience with a wild bear, and I'm just in fascination at that point. And then, of course, it's like, oh, this is potentially serious. Yeah. And the bear turns and looks our direction. And it's like, whoa, this is serious. Do I jump out of the tent and confront the bear? Do I stay in the tent and feel like a burrito? Jumping out of the tent naked feels pretty vulnerable and also aggressive,
Yeah.
And not necessarily wise. But I had been reading Black Elk Speaks the night before, sitting on the edge of this lake, and as the sun set and the loons were calling, and my system was feeling very attuned in nature because I'd been spending more and more time in nature. So one place I could go and did not feel judged, And so it became increasingly a haven for my spirit and soul. And having read Black Elk, I can't imagine having better preparation for that encounter, as he talks about the center of the world being everywhere, the one tree. And I'd been playing a little bit with yoga and breath, and so I started breathing and trying to communicate with the bear. There's no food in here, meaning no harm. And I looked back outside the door of the tent, and sure enough, I'll call her at this point, is walking towards the tent. And, she's maybe 20 feet away at this point. And we can hear her starting to breathe, and there's these little strong sniffs that would come in like in a 3. She'd sniff in, and then she'd blow it out through her nostrils, as if cleaning the nostrils and emptying her lungs, and then blowing it out in the same pattern, just fully empty. And she kept repeating that. And then as she got to the right front edge of the tent. I'm sitting at the door of the tent at that point in my cross-legged position and trying to communicate with the bear.
Mm-hmm.
And she sniffs at the bottom of the tent, and then she sniffs at the height at the top of the tent, and she walks slowly around the tent doing this. And then she comes to the door of the tent and sticks her head inside. And at this point, we are, nose to nose, breathing each other's breath and looking into each other's eyes. And how long this lasted, I have no idea. It surely was not long. But I am breathing her breath as she is breathing mine. Something happens and I trance and go inside her, and I become bear. I'm just off wandering through the forest looking for food. And at some point I realize I'm where I am, and I got to get back into my body. And there's this sort of teasing apart of a cotton ball kind of consciousnesses. And then she pulls out of the tent, her head out of the tent, and walks off through this old growth forest as the morning sunlight is coming in shafts through these trees and leaving shadows, and she just disappears through the forest. And at that time, I was working in a runaway house in the inner city of Detroit, probably 12-hour days, often sending particularly young women home to homes where the state wanted them to be, but homes that I didn't feel were safe for them. I didn't feel good about it. I was conflicted because I was looking for work that I could do that would be good in the world. Having given up and been disillusioned in my late teens, having been the preacher and converting friends to Jesus, and then discovering another grief story that I could no longer believe it, and I had been leading them astray. So I was trying to do good, but then I'd go home at night and I'd drink and smoke pot and opium and hash and so on, and I'd think about killing myself again. And then I would remember Bear and the mystery and the wonder, the magic, and the awe that was in my system, and the power of that bear. And I would choose to live for another day. She saved my life in that era and many times since. But part of that gift was she initiated me into breathing into the belly, into that Dantian, into that grounding center of home and security and safety. And belonging that lives in that arena of our body. And then that became reinforced when I walked into the wilderness and could have died on the cliff face, but for Bear and the remembrance of that breath.
Wow.
And then it saved my life again, maybe a month later when I picked up a hitchhiker who, in the middle of the night in Oregon, on a lonely night, and he shouldn't have been there out in the rain in a white T-shirt. My system was on alert, but when he called into the pickup and did not answer my hello, except to say, I'm going to kill you. Bear was with me again, as was that breath.
Wow.
And this embodiment and this learning to come back into our bodies is a kind of coming home, is the alchemizing, if you will, of the wound of separation. It is a path back into being human and being one with the planet, in my experience. And in fact, being one with the cosmos.
Yeah. That's so beautiful. It's more stressful to listen to you tell it, I will say, than read it. I'm like, I read this, but listening to you, I'm like, I'm still worried about you.
I know.
Me too.
Yeah.
I was like, I didn't get the gravity of how close this bear was when I read this. But it was really beautiful. It reminded me of, I was on a hike with my boys and we ran into a mama moose with her baby. And anybody who's spent time outdoors know that is not a place you want to be in the middle of. So I grabbed my boys and hid them in a bush behind a tree. And I stood behind the tree and I remember talking to her. I was just like, I'm a mama too. I have my two babes. We are not, we're not here to harm. And I remember just talking to her and feeling like the energy between us and it being really tense at first, like a very taut line. And then suddenly it just went, whew. And I could feel her drop and I dropped and we walked past and she didn't pay us any mind. And it just reminded me of that moment of that you just trust. You just trust that you can sense and feel them and I had to stay calm because if my breathing or anything got panicked, I was worried I was going to panic my boys.
Exactly.
And so I just needed to talk really calmly to them, you're just going to hide in this bush right here.
Yeah, yeah.
Like, it's just the normalest thing. This happens every time I'm on this hike. Don't worry about it. So it reminded me of that. And I remember the adrenaline not hitting until I think we were like home from Steamboat, which is like a 3-hour drive away. And finally I'm telling my husband, I'm like, oh my God. But it just reminded me of that moment and the beauty and opportunity that we can have when we trust that internal knowing, that ancient part of ourselves knows how to connect back into the vibrations of the world. I wonder if there is a poem here that reminds you either of that connection with Bear or that connection with force that connects us all.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you for that invitation.
Yeah.
Yeah. I got to honor that moose encounter. Oh my God. You'll live with that forever and the power of that feeling. My gosh.
Yeah.
And one of the comment around that piece that your story illustrates, Andrea, as does mine, is what I kept saying and knowing to myself, fear is my enemy here.
Yeah.
Which is why I didn't jump out of the tent. It would have felt like a fearful response.
Yeah.
And potentially aggressive with the bear or whatever. But and the same is true today. When I read the headlines or the news, it's so easy to get sucked into that. But fear is what's being fed intentionally through the social media and media, et cetera, et cetera. And so now more than ever, our bodies and our griefs and our joys and sorrows can become our allies at this time, and becoming literate with them. And I'd say literacy of story with that too, and maybe we circle back to that. But here's a poem called Alchemies of Grief and Sorrow that is a kind of calling home. So, oh, the wild joys of my grief are heavy upon me this morning, though in truth they are never far from my awareness these days, for there is much grieving, desperate to be allowed room to roam within the landscapes of my life, and seeking to inform my attention and days and living. For the coming poverty of the world is great, without the 120-million-year-old sea turtles and their wondrous migrations of rebirth, and without the marvelous dancing honeybees pollinating our imaginations and food. Where and how will we humans live if we do not remember our interbreathing with all of life? How will the trees migrate? And where will all the people go who lose homes to the rise of seawaters, climatic megadroughts that leave mouths too dry for speech, hungry stomachs that cannot wait, and how easy it is to fight for scarce resources rather than to live courageously into the vulnerable interrelatedness of our being? But the alchemies of allowing such grief and sorrow into my spirit and soul are indeed transformational, and so also wild. For in this I am changed, transmuted even, and now know this body of you and I, and we and they, us and them of skin and scale and feather. We are but one in the end. And in this awareness rises an ecological comfort that even unspeakable rage, pain, and suffering, held within the sacred circle of belonging, carry a medicine of inexplicable, transformative joy, married to my grief and sorrow.
So beautiful. I mean, I feel like the poets that we've been so blessed. I mean, just like have graced us with their wisdom and their words. And it's just such a beautiful reminder of why poetry is so important. It's just the way that poets put realities together and can bring together two things that just, So thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
That was beautiful. There was a line in here that it's a short line, and I'm gonna misquote it because I can't. I know it's in here, but I have a lot of underlines, and I need to have a better system.
No, just one little sticky. Just one.
I need to just be like, Andrea, you're allowed 5. You're never going to get through more than that. I need a new system. But it's like you came to this realization. You said, nature is in love with itself or herself. you chose those words, in love with herself, not loves herself. I don't know if you use herself. I'm going to use it because that feels more comfortable to me. But it was in love with herself. To me, it was like, in our culture, to be in love with yourself is such a negative thing. Like it's so selfish and you're self-centered and like, oh, that person's so in love with themselves. And you did it as you were, like you've walked us through sort of ecosystems and you've walked us through like these cycles to me to culminate in this understanding you shared with us that nature is so in love with herself. It was just like, it was profound for me, the language, the realization, the invitation to be in love with ourselves, and the places where I have my own blocks around that. And I don't know. I just wanted to highlight that.
Yeah. Well, and it felt like there were multiple moments that you were like also struggling with that idea of being taught not to be prideful or not.
Yeah.
And I think that that's one of the real wounds in these religious fundamentalist paradigms that people grow up in. And it's like there is a truth around not being overly identified with the ego. But then there's like this tricky part where it's like no permission to just be in love with yourself, in love with, because when you can really feel that, it's not an egotistical thing. It's sort of being in love with all of life, but you have to like be in love with yourself to know I'm worthy of love. And I am lovable and you are inherently worthy of love. You get to be in love with yourself. I mean, nature's not saying I should be in love with myself because I'm an aspen tree, but like, sorry, pine.
Right.
Yeah. It's all of nature is in love with itself.
Yeah.
And that I just want to highlight that. And like being in love with itself is not at the expense of anything else. Like loving yourself doesn't mean, therefore, there's not enough love in the world for you to love yourself, right? Hearing you say that, it's like, oh, of course, like the aspen tree loves itself, but it's not at the expense of that fucking pack rat that I can't get off my property,
I have one of those too.
It's my nemesis. You're probably a lot more nice to yours. Mine, we're 5 years on at least.
Well, thanks for calling that one out. And I think I tell the story in the book of a friend, psychic friend who was visiting and looked at me and my wife, Dottie, partner that Andrea, I know, she's so good. I had been through a cancer journey before I went and was out of hers for about a year before I got diagnosed with a terminal cancer. And so in that space, this dear friend, Jackie, said, Larry, you want me to do a reading? And I was like, we didn't have much time for getting to the airport. So it's like, look, let's do a short one. And she looks at me and she says, you have a hole in your heart, Larry, where you leak love. And until you can close that, you will not finish your life work. And this came at a time where I was more in love with myself. I had more self-care, self-love than any other time in my life. People loving me, a community that loves me deeply and, respects me and so on, and I them. And so I had to really sit with that. And before coming to, she's right. I am leaking love. I have a hard time receiving love. Somebody says, at that time, somebody said, well, that's a great book, Larry. I'd sort of let it roll off my back, or I love you, or that was a great program, or whatever you did, wonderful poem. I wouldn't really let it in. And so this idea of really what it is to receive life, and then beginning to look at spirituality as a capacity to receive, which is a very feminine characteristic, right? Of the sacred feminine. And it was like, so that really helped me turn my life at that point into a deeper receptivity, which is one way to talk about a more beautiful story. And also a more beautiful now, which I write about in the book. And, it's easy for me in these times for my anti-authoritarianism, having been traumatized by that authoritarian father and God, to just want to fight, which is a trap. As I now experience it, and not that there's not a place for that warrior spirit, there really is. But if I fight with hatred, I'm already lost the battle, because I've already entered what I've come to call evil, which is in my story and in the book, wherever I see myself or others without being able to recognize their innate, sacred, divine nature. And words are loaded here for people. So,
Yeah.
divine is like that. But the inherent belonging, inherent worthiness of life, when I can't see that, that's what is evil. It's not a theological thing at all.
Mm-hmm.
It's a practical thing that was captured by Jesus when he says, what you do unto others, you do unto yourself. That's what all nature knows. That's what the aspen know. And that piece about, for me, and it was on a medicine journey when this hit me so hard, I'd been studying them for a long time. And so the entheogens in the book are a big part of my story and my life.
Mm-hmm.
But it's deep into an entheogen journey and touching this aspen and this knowing that I was doing this with my hands and hugging it and knowing that I am hugging and touching every other aspen in this grove because they come off the same root. And the wound of humanity is this loss of reference for our connectivity and interbreathing, the reciprocity, the interbeing, to use Thich Nhat Hanh's words, with all of life.
Mm-hmm.
And the more beautiful story is that we innately belong. We're born of the stars and the water, and I carry the water, I carry the sun in every cell of my body, and fire.
Mm-hmm.
And water is in touch with every atom, molecule in my body. Every cell is bathed in water. That's the ocean. The raindrop knows it's the ocean. The ocean knows the raindrop is the ocean. That's this piece where life loves itself. The raindrop is made up of who knows how many millions of molecules of water, but it's always returning to the ocean. And the ocean is always giving birth to the raindrops. That's the nature of life.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's this cyclic love of self. And the red in tooth and claw piece is there, but it is not the dominant story, even as Darwin came to recognize.
Mm-hmm.
It's this cooperative interbeing is a bigger story. And it's the story that humanity is invited into recognizing at this time, of rebalancing that. And with that rebalancing, the sacred masculine and feminine that lives in each of us. And that's the more beautiful story.
Yeah. At least for myself and anyone else who has this wound, to underline what you said, which is we innately belong. And I feel like that can be part of other people that I know that carry this Jehovah wound, as you term it, is this deep sense that they don't belong.
Yes.
And then they find or are raised within a religious community where they are supposed to belong, but if their thinking or their actions or something make them unbelonging there, but then they're also othering people. So they're also saying, well, people who aren't here are not worthy of belonging. And so it's just, and they carry this sense of then I belong nowhere, this sense of unbelonging or disbelonging. I don't know what the word would be. I'm making them up. But yeah, I just to hear that and to let that sit on our hearts that innately we belong. And then we create systems of membership of worthiness of being in a space. But I mean, that was my PhD dissertation was on belonging. I searched for belonging my whole life.
Oh my God.
I know. Wow. So listening to you is oh my gosh, I studied this and I know it was from a wound in my own heart because I never felt like I belonged. I was raised Catholic, questioned it the whole way. My dad was very, very expansive and entered into conversations with me about it. When I chose not to get confirmed, he asked me to study. And if at the end of that study I didn't want to do it, he never held it against me or made me feel bad or guilty. But still I carried this. And as I was reading your book, I got to the end, I thought, oh my God, even those of us who weren't raised in as intense of a religious doctrine and culture as you and other people that I know, we all carry this Jehovah wound because of the way that Christianity has been woven into our culture and the way that we do things, at least I can definitely say for in America. And so it was just this moment where I was like, oh my God, we all have a Jehovah wound.
Yeah. Well, and I feel that wounding so clearly right now in the identity politics and the way that our politics really, it's no, I'm right and I'm on the right side of things. And like you're talking about, which is this piece I keep talking about for Andrea's probably I've heard enough messages about it. I know you're processing it, but I'm this idea of how do I not continue to contribute to the energy of war? I don't want there to be war. I don't have an answer. I'm still grappling with it. I know that there are things that are good about our rage and our anger and like maybe that feeling of protectiveness, Andrea, in that moment of seeing the moose and being like, you will not come near my children.
Oh, it wasn't like that. I was like, Mama Moose.
Yeah. And so it's like being able to shift your energy in that way. And like you're talking about, Larry, recognizing the sacredness in the person. And so not, and it's so easy to fall into the like, you're wrongheaded. Why are you believing, whatever, but to just realize like so many influences, so many factors have brought us to this moment. Yeah. This person is believing a thing that maybe is doing harm. But is it going to be helpful for me to just try to shame them out of doing harm? No. Yeah. I loved what you said. I was like, when Andrea's like in this one thing, and I was like, oh, I have 20. But that I wrote down so that I don't have to like go back and be like, where did I put that?
You have a better system.
That's a good system. But that this idea of when you were talking about like just striving, like business as usual, attacking each other, and all of these ways, I think you called it like the cultural ferocity, attacking the imaginal cells of your soul and spirit. And I was just like, that feels so real. And that's what I'm working towards is like, how do we not be in these sort of, as Charles Eisenstein calls it, the story of the people that we've been indoctrinated into. That is we're creating kind of an autoimmune disease of our own species. Yeah. And that parallel that you were making as you were coming to terms with your diagnosis, even around like, oh, and then there's this thing in me that, am I like at war with it? Is it like, how am I talking to this thing that this disease and I are one? Yeah. So that was a really impactful part of your story too. I have a friend who just died this summer, and cancer and along their journey and their healing, and they had been giving all this love to their cells, and then they were getting the message like, no, tell them they don't belong here, and they're like, like, what do I say? What do I do? And then this really loving doctor that they talked to, who was sort of more an alternative healer doctor, and he said, you want to tell them they think they're the best version of you, and you just want to say, you have it wrong. This is actually not the best version of me. You can go now. And they were like, well, but that feels like I'm battling them. And it said, no, there's just nothing more loving than telling them the truth. And so it was like this twist on being loving. But it feels like all of it. I had cancer, was it like 15 years ago? And it's, that's territory that almost feels like that religious field too, where it's like, this is the right thing to do and you're doing it wrong. And are you believing the right things? And so
I am glad you're talking about this though, because this felt important.
Yeah, just like finding that relationship. And I work with people who have terminal diagnoses, and it's sort of like that strange space of like, we all have a terminal diagnosis, which is being alive. Yeah. And then there's the space you walk into that's like, someone's starting to put a number on this. Something's kept becoming really real instead of sort of, I don't know. And it could just happen. And so like because I imagine even post writing the book, you're like, that relationship is still in progress. Like how are you with that? And where are you in that?
Yeah. Okay. It's an expansive conversation that could go on a long time, and I'm aware of time too. And I appreciate this question. It is profound and deep, and I do make the analogy in the book between my cancer and the cultural times we're in, and also then the hitchhiker that I picked up and said, I'm going to kill you, right? Yeah. Because one of the gifts for me in working with entheogens is develop this practice of working, which I did in the opening book, or after God, seeking God on a mountaintop. And this phrase, let me see your true face, became a mantra, and that I use with and without the entheogens. But when I'm trying to dive deep and really understand the dynamics of something and feel the energetics. And so after I got the diagnosis, I was doing that with the cancer cells. And it became clear that, they were mutations, if you will, of a healthier Larry cell that would self-destruct me and themselves. They were on a suicide mission of sorts, and endless consumption, endless hunger, but without a driving purpose, meaning for higher complexity, which life is part of life's direction in the larger whole. And yes, cancer and death and all of this, it comes to all of us somehow. So it too has a larger function, but I begin to take it as a spiritual invitation for going deeper. Whatever was going to come, whether it was an imminent death within this initial predicted 6 to 8 months, but it was like, how can I make whatever happens here, I'm going to live into a more beautiful story, because that has become my nature. And that beautiful story was to begin to ask it to go to sleep, rather than, so this is my path, not everybody's, of course, but because the boundary thing is really important and is tricky. It's like with the hitchhiker when he said, I'm going to kill you. There's this long space as I let that sink in, enough so that it became uncomfortable because I was not going into fear, thanks to the breath and the bear, right? And again, I knew fear was the enemy here because that would have been to give over to him. But I stayed silent and calm long enough that as our eyes adjusted to the darkness and we could begin to see each other's eyes and, sort of dimly in the darkness, he looked down to the floor. And then he looked back up and then he looked down again. And I knew at that point that I was in charge. And I was able to say, look, I'll give you a ride if you need one, but if you're going to give me any trouble, you can get out of the truck now. And so with the cancer, the boundary for me became, I'm going to ask you to go to sleep here. I don't know what's happening, but together, let's write a more beautiful story. We're in partnership with this. This is life. So speaking from that place of knowing we're both life and recognizing that, the cancer voracity was the word that I came up with. I think endless hunger, right? Just consumption. Recognition that that's our culture. It's a capitalistic system. That's what we're doing with the planet right now. Yeah, it's just to honor these boundaries. And it is tricky at this time. And we all need support and help. We're in this together. And it does really invite this deep relationship and inquiry into the container that I will create of this self and the identity, the story that I will tell of myself. And for me, I choose love and belonging for all of us. And I choose love for those that, who I would take out of the offices of power. If I bring hate to them, it doesn't work. It feeds the system. And that's what that energy wants, is to be hated. I'm not going to give it that power.
Would you read us another poem, Larry?
Yes, I'd be honored to, my friend Andrea.
Okay.
And this is the other one that you requested. And the title is also the first line on this poem. I am a child of you, stars and sun. Of you, fire, spark, and flame of my life. In every cell of my body, that I am. I'm a child of you, water, of your drops and flakes, rivers, oceans, and fluidly flowing clouds, in every cell of my body. I'm a child of you, air, of your unseen, yet felt and vital, energizing presence, in every cell of my body. I'm a child of you, soil, informer of digestion, integration, releasing and gifting back, in every cell of my body. I'm a child of you, earth, wondrous mother of my own rooting into this life, in every cell of my body. I'm a child of you, moon, of your cycles of birthing into death and rebirth, in every cell of my body. I'm a child of you, unspeakable mystery, weaver of life's polarities into this wholeness of one, in every aspect of my being. This I am. Thank you. I honor you. I love you.
Thank you.
Deep thanks to each of you again for this work you're doing in the world and presence you're carrying, helping us use grief as an ally, an informer. Yeah.
I just want to do like ellipses. I'm like, I'm not finished, but guess we're going to wrap up for this conversation. I love that. Our new way of moving through. The closing is with the Planet Grief deck. And this is actually turning out to be way more challenging because we answer most of these questions in our podcast inadvertently. Well, this one feels relevant. I'm going to slightly reword it. So the question was, if you could speak to your loved one right now, what would you tell them related to grief and the loss of a person? But what felt really so present in your book and where I sort of went in my own, in the reading of it was like, if you could speak to your inner young one right now, what would you tell them? Andrea.
God, I feel so tender. That's a really tender question.
These all are. Such a good talk.
It's such a good talk. We love you, Arena and Brianna. Yeah, I mean, it's just up right now. I think a lot of people's young ones needing to be tended to. A lot of my practice right now is like going to her and just reminding her it was never her fault and that the adults around her didn't take care of her, but that I can, and that's just, it's hard to like go into that moment of like such confusion and such questioning and the sense of not just abandonment, but abandonment and being harmed. So I've just been telling her it was never, ever, ever her fault and that the adults around her did not do a good job.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. Really sweet. Yeah. How about you, Larry?
Well, thank you for this question. And yeah, I do also go there frequently and send love to that young Larry. And I say, I love you. This is an older version of you. You're going to be okay. Your life is beautiful. It all comes together.
And thank you through this book for letting us also say that to the young Larry. You know what I mean? Like, it's like now you have the community of people you didn't then, that he didn't have, reading this book and getting to tend to him and energetically shower him with love and acceptance and witness his radiance. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you for that perspective. Yeah.
Yeah, it's really beautiful. It's very courageous. And you did it for him. All versions of you, but particularly for him.
Yeah.
Rebecca, what would you say to our little Rebecca?
Well, I feel like I want to name that in each of you speaking to your inner young one, felt like you were speaking also to my inner young one. I'm like, oh my gosh, we should just sit in circles and say what we would say to our inner young ones. And then we would all receive all this healing and medicine from that. Yeah. That was beautiful.
Yeah.
I was just like, okay, I need to just go cry for a minute about that and let that in. Talk about receiving.
Yeah.
Yeah, I feel like I would tell her, you are so wise. Trust yourself. Trust yourself. Trust yourself.
Yeah.
You know things.
Yeah. Really beautiful.
Oh my goodness.
That was
a weepy one.
That was a weepy one.
Which are good in our world.
Well, thank you so much.
Yes, thank you. We will share with our listeners where they can find you, having been on one of your absolutely transformational wilderness retreats. I mean, you are sort of forever a pivot point in my life.
Oh,
like
Andrea,
you are at a point in my, both of you, of course, like that's so beautiful. I'm like, wait, both of you, at a pivot point in my life of like one of those things where when I look back at my life, whether that's tonight or 50 years from now, it was beyond words. The experience was beyond words. So we will be sure that people can find you and more people can find their way back to nature and back to themselves with you. So thank you. Thank you, Larry. My love, love, love to Dottie as well.
Yeah. Thank you both. Such a pleasure and honor and delicious conversation with you.
Yeah.
All right.
All right. Bye to our listeners.
Thank you for listening to this episode of All the Grief. You can find us on Instagram at allthegriefpod. And please take a moment to rate our podcast and share us with your friends. We'd love to keep expanding our reach to all the people who could benefit from conversations on grief. Take care.